My daughter kissed my cheek, smiled, and told me she loved me. 10 minutes later, I found out she had signed the paper to have me killed. She thought I was just an old carpenter with a bad heart. She forgot that I built the house she grew up in with my own 2 hands. She forgot that even old wood can burn. If you love stories where the underdog fights back, hit that subscribe button right now and tell me in the comments. It was a Tuesday morning, defined not by the calendar but by the color of the sky, a relentless bruised gray that pressed down on the windshield of my pickup. It was the kind of dampness that didn't just sit on your skin. It worked its way into the joinery of a man. It found the hairline fractures in your bones and the rusted hinges of your joints. I sat in the driver's seat of my 2004 Ford F-150, the engine idling with a low, steady rumble that I felt more than heard. It vibrated up through the steering column, settling into my palms. My shoulder, the right one I'd dislocated framing a custom Colonial back in '98, was throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache. That shoulder was my personal barometer. It knew the rain was coming before the clouds did. My hands gripped the leather at 10 and 2. They were hands that told their own story. Rough, wide, and mapped with scars. Calloused ridges where the skin had hardened against hammer handles and saw blades. Stained permanently, with 40 years of oil, walnut stain and sawdust. They were the hands of a builder. Hands that knew the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition. Beside me, my daughter Jessica sat in the passenger seat. The heater was blasting, smelling faintly of dust and old coffee, but the cab felt cold. Jessica was checking her phone again. It was a sharp, jerky movement. Unlock, swipe, scroll, lock. That was the 10th time in as many minutes. Something isn't plumb, I thought. The foundation is shifting. She never used to be this nervous. Jessica was the steady one. Even as a child, when things broke, she didn't cry. She looked for the glue. Now her energy was frantic, a high-frequency vibration that made the air in the truck feel thin. Her thumbs moved like lightning across the screen, the pale blue light illuminating the underside of her face. Her brow was furrowed, etching lines into her skin that made her look older than her 32 years. She looked sharp. I had to give her that. She was wearing a charcoal business suit tailored perfectly to her silhouette. I remembered the day I bought it for her birthday last year. We had gone to the city, to a store where they served you sparkling water while you browsed. The price tag on the jacket alone cost more than my first used car, but when she put it on, she looked like the woman I had always hoped she would become. Strong, independent, important. Someone who didn't have to break her back for a paycheck. But today the suit looked like armor. "You have your boarding pass?" I asked. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet cab, a gravelly intrusion into her digital world. Jessica jumped. It was a physical recoil, as if I had shouted or dropped a heavy beam. She shoved the phone into her designer purse, the clasp clicking shut with a sound like a pistol hammer. "Yes, Dad, of course. Everything is on the app." She turned to me and forced a smile. Being a father means you learn to read your children's faces better than any blueprint. I saw the muscles tighten around her jaw. I saw the lack of crinkles around her eyes. It was a tight, brittle smile. Structural integrity. 0. Her hand went to her throat. Her fingers twisted the thin gold chain of her necklace, the one her mother had left her. Lies, I thought, a sudden heaviness settling in my gut. She hasn't done that since she was 16 and dented the fender of the station wagon. She always touches the gold when she lies. I tapped the steering wheel, trying to keep the tone casual, trying to ignore the alarm bells ringing in the back of my mind. "And Mark knows you're leaving on time?" I asked, watching the windshield wipers slap back and forth. Thwack-hiss. Thwack-hiss. "I thought he might come to see you off. It's a 3-day trip, Jess." "Mark is busy, Dad," she said. Her tone was sharp, cutting through the hum of the heater, like a piece of glass hidden in the carpet. She turned away from me, looking out the window at the travelers dodging the rain, dragging their rolling luggage through the slush. "The investment firm is going through a merger," she recited, the words coming out too fast, too rehearsed. "He's tied up in meetings all day. It's all hands on deck. That's why I needed you to take Leo. Mark literally can't leave the office." A merger, I thought. Mark is always in a merger, or a crisis, or a restructuring. Mark was a man of soft hands and expensive colognes. He dealt in intangibles, futures, crypto, leverage, things you couldn't touch, couldn't build, couldn't trust. I looked in the rearview mirror. My grandson, Leo, was sitting in the back seat. He was 8 years old. Usually, truck was his jungle gym. He would be begging for my phone to play Minecraft, or kicking the back of my seat, or asking if we could stop for ice cream at the Dairy Queen on Route 9. But today, he was statue still. The rearview mirror framed him like a portrait of misery. He sat with his backpack hugged tight to his chest, like a shield. His small knuckles were white as he gripped the nylon straps. He wasn't looking at his tablet. He wasn't looking out the window. He was staring at the back of his mother's head with an intensity that unsettled me. His eyes were wide. Too wide, dark pools of anxiety in a pale face. "You okay back there, sport?" I asked, catching his eye in the mirror. I tried to throw him a wink, the conspiratorial grandfather wink that usually got a giggle. Leo didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just stared at me, then darted his eyes back to Jessica's hair. "He's fine," Jessica said, dismissively. Not even turning around to look at him, she unbuckled her seatbelt, the mechanism snapping loudly. "He's just tired. He stayed up too late playing video games. I told him to go to bed. But you know how he is." She turned to me then. For a second, just a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. I didn't see the successful businesswoman. I didn't see the charcoal suit. I saw my little girl, terrified. I saw fear in her eyes. Pure, unadulterated panic that she was trying desperately to swallow. It was the look of someone standing on a bridge, looking down at the dark water, deciding whether to jump. "What have you done, Jess?" I wanted to ask, "What kind of trouble has Mark got you into?" But the moment passed. The wall went back up. "Thanks for doing this, Dad," she said. Her voice wavered, a tremor in the timbre. "Seriously. I know it's a lot to ask, taking him for 3 days while I'm in Chicago. I know your shoulder is acting up." "It's never a burden, Jess," I said softly. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. My hand engulfed hers, leather and callous against manicured smoothness. "You know that. Me and Leo, we're the dynamic duo. We've got big plans. Maybe build that birdhouse we talked about." "Right," she said. She stared at our hands. She squeezed my hand. Her skin was cold, clammy, like stone that had been left out in the frost. "Just take care of him, okay?" She looked up, her eyes glistening. "Keep him close. Don't let him out of your sight." "I always do," I said. "You know he's safe with me." She nodded, a jerky, mechanical motion. She opened the door, letting in a gust of damp, exhaust-scented air. The noise of the airport buses, idling, whistles blowing, tires on wet pavement, rushed into the cab. She stepped out, her heels clicking on the asphalt. She grabbed her rolling suitcase from the back seat. She leaned in one last time to wave at Leo. "My baby," she said, her voice cracking. "Be good for Grandpa. I love you." Leo didn't wave back. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say, "I love you, Mommy." He just watched her, his grip on the backpack tightening until his fingers looked like they might snap. Jessica hesitated. She stood there in the rain, the water spotting her expensive suit. She bit her lip, looking at the boy, then at me. "Tell me," I begged her silently. "Just tell me what's wrong. I can fix it. I can fix anything." But she didn't. She turned and walked quickly toward the sliding glass doors of the terminal. The automatic doors yawned open to swallow her. She didn't look back. Not one. She walked with her head down, merging into the crowd of strangers, a single charcoal figure lost in a sea of gray coats and gray intentions. I watched until the glass doors slid shut, sealing her away. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It fogged the cold window. The unease in my gut was growing. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a physical weight, like a heavy stone settling in the pit of my stomach. The structural integrity of my world felt compromised. The load was too heavy. I put the truck in gear, but my hand hesitated on the shifter. Why was her hand so cold? I put the truck in drive, the transmission clunking into gear with a familiar heavy thud. I checked my blind spot force of habit and merged into the chaotic, swirling flow of airport traffic. The loop was a sea of red brake lights and angry horns, a parade of people rushing to be somewhere else. "All right, Leo," I said. I tried to inject some artificial cheer into my voice, forcing the gravel out of my throat. The eagle has flown, the coop. It's just us men now. The bachelors. I tapped the steering wheel to the rhythm of the turn signal. Click-clack, click-clack. What do you say? Are we hungry? I'm thinking pancakes. A big stack. Maybe that place on 4th Street with the blueberry syrup you like. Or we could go to the diner and get those grease-bomb hash browns your mother hates. Silence. The cab felt hermetically sealed, isolated from the world outside, yet the air pressure inside seemed to be dropping. I glanced back in the rearview mirror. Leo wasn't looking at me. He was trembling. It wasn't a shiver from the cold. The heater was cranking out hot air now. It was a vibration, starting in his core and radiating out to his limbs. His head was down, his chin buried in his chest. Leo, I asked. My voice dropped an octave, shifting from playful grandfather to concerned guardian. What is it, buddy? You feeling sick? Car sick? He didn't answer. We merged onto the highway, leaving the airport behind. The city skyline was a smudge of charcoal against the lighter gray of the sky. The rain picked up, hammering the roof of the truck like a handful of gravel thrown against sheet metal. Thwackus. Thwackus. The wipers fought a losing battle. I watched him in the mirror more than I watched the road. He looked small. Too small for the back seat of the truck, too small for whatever weight he was carrying. We were about 5 miles out, cruising in the middle lane, when the dam broke. I heard the distinct click of the seatbelt release. Hey, I said automatically, my eyes snapping to the mirror. Buckle up, kiddo. We're on the highway. You know the rules. Leo didn't listen. He scrambled forward, moving with a frantic, animalistic desperation that alarmed me. He didn't just unbuckle. He launched himself. He climbed over the center console, his sneakers kicking the dashboard, his knees knocking against the gear shift. Leo, sit down, I shouted, reaching out with my right arm to brace him, trying to keep the truck steady with my left hand on the wheel. What the hell are you doing? He practically fell into the passenger seat, landing in a heap of denim and terror. He didn't sit back. He turned toward me, grabbing my right arm with both hands. Grandpa, he whispered. His voice was shaking so hard it vibrated against the flannel of my sleeve. I could feel his fingernails through the fabric, digging into the muscle I'd strained years ago. What is it? I asked, looking rapidly between him and the wet asphalt ahead. You're scaring me, son. I glanced at his face. It was pale, drained of all color, like a sheet of drywall. His lips were trembling. We can't go home, he said. The words came out in a rush of air, as if he had been holding them in since we left the driveway. I frowned, confusion warring with the adrenaline of his sudden movement. What? Did you forget something? Your inhaler? Your switch? No. He squeezed my arm harder, his small fingers acting like a vice. He shook his head violently. We can't go to your house. We can't go to my house. We have to hide. I eased off the gas. The truck slowed, other cars whipping past us with roars of spray and annoyance. Hide? I repeated. Leo, look at me. I took a risk and took my eyes off the road for a full 2 seconds. I looked deep into his eyes. They weren't the eyes of a child playing a game. They were the eyes of a witness. Tell me why, Leo, I said, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. Take a deep breath. Tell me exactly what is happening. I heard them, Leo sobbed. The tears finally spilled over, hot tracks on his pale cheeks. Last night, I woke up because I was thirsty. I went downstairs to get water. Who did you hear? Mom and Dad? Mark? They were in the kitchen. The lights were off. They thought I was asleep.
Fair guy that.
Not Dad, he called him Mark. What did they say, Leo? Mark was yelling, Leo said. The fuzz tumbled out, mixed with hiccups. He wasn't shouting loud, but he was scary loud, like a whisper scream. He said the deadline was today. He said the investors were coming. Investors? My grip on the steering wheel tightened. What investors? The bad men, Leo said. He said if he didn't pay them back by 5 o'clock, they were going to hurt him. They were going to hurt Mom. My stomach tightened into a knot of cold iron. I knew Mark played with money. I knew he liked to leverage. But this sounded like loan sharks. This sounded like the kind of debt you don't file for bankruptcy on. Pay who back? I asked. How much? Leo? 3 million, Leo whispered. The number hung in the air of the cab, absurd and terrifying. He said he didn't have it, Leo continued. He said he lost it on the coin thing. Crypto. And then he said he found a way. What way? He said he needed the money from the insurance, Leo whispered. My heart skipped a beat. A literal pause in the rhythm of my life. What insurance, Leo? Leo looked at me. His eyes were wide, haunted, and filled with a pity no 8-year-old should ever feel for his grandfather. Yours, Grandpa. I felt the blood drain from my face, rushing down to my feet, leaving me lightheaded. The highway seemed to tilt on its axis. The gray sky spun. Mine?
I croaked. Mom was crying, Leo continued, his voice barely audible over the hum of the tires.
She was sitting at the table with her head in her hands. She said, I can't do it, Mark. I can't. He's my father. And Mark? He grabbed her. I saw red. A flash of pure violent rage. He grabbed her. He grabbed her shoulders, Leo said. He shook her. He said, It's the only way, Jess. We're 3 million in the hole. If we don't do this, we're dead. They will kill me. Then they will kill you. And then they will take Leo. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles popped, white bone pressing against tight skin. The leather creaked under the strain. He said, Leo choked on a sob. He said, The old man has a bad heart anyway. He takes those pills. Nobody will question it. It will look like a heart attack. My mind tried to reject it. It tried to build a wall against the information, to shore up the collapsing reality. Not Jessica. Not my Jessa. But deep down, the structural failures had been there for months. The sudden business trip to get her out of the way. The tension in her jaw. Mark's sudden interest in my affairs last Thanksgiving. Asking about the will, about the deed to the property. Asking to see my medication bottles in case of emergency. My own daughter, I thought. The pain was sharper than the dislocation in my shoulder. My little girl. She didn't stop him. She got on a plane. She sold me. She had looked me in the eye, kissed my cheek, and handed me over to the butcher. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. I had to think. I had to be the engineer. Assess the load. Calculate the stress points. Survive. Did they say, how? I asked. My voice was raspy, like I had swallowed sand. Did they say when? Mark said a van is coming. Leo whispered, a black van. He said, they are professionals. He said they cost a lot of money, so it has to look real. When, Leo? He said, they will be at your house at noon. I checked the digital clock on the dashboard. The green numbers mocked me. 11:45 a.m. We were 15 minutes from my house, he said. Leo looked down at his hands. He said, you wouldn't feel a thing. He said they have a drug that stops the heart. Okay, I said. Okay, Leo, I hear you. My mind raced. If I went home, I died. If I went to the police, what did I have? The word of an 8-year-old boy against a prominent financial analyst. Mark would spin it. He'd say I was senile, that Leo had an active imagination, and if these men were professionals, the police might not get there in time. Or worse, Mark might have leverage there too. Do you believe me? Leo asked. His voice was small, fragile. I looked at him. I saw the honesty in his face. I saw the trauma of a boy who had crouched in the dark and heard his parents plotting murder in the kitchen, where he ate his cereal. I reached out and put my heavy, calloused hand on his shoulder. I squeezed gently. Yes, I said. I believe you. I looked back at the road. The exit for our town was coming up in 1 mile. Hold on, Leo, I said, my voice hardening into steel. We aren't going home. I didn't turn the truck around. My first instinct was to slam on the brakes, spin the wheel, and burn rubber back toward the highway to put 100 miles between us and that house. But 40 years in construction teaches you that panic causes accidents. Panic makes walls collapse. Panic gets you killed. If they were tracking my phone, and Mark, with his obsession for data and family safety apps, almost certainly was, any sudden deviation would be a flare in the dark. If I turned around now, I was just a dot on a screen, acting suspiciously. I had to be smarter. I had to be a ghost. We aren't going to the driveway, I told Leo, keeping my voice low and steady. though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "We're going to play a game, the kind of game hunters play. We have to be invisible." I took the exit for our town, the familiar streets. Main Street, with its faded awning over the bakery, the post office where I knew the clerk by name, felt alien now. The world had shifted. Every car behind us looked like a threat. Every pedestrian with a phone looked like a lookout. The town I had lived in for 30 years had transformed into a hostile landscape. I drove past the entrance to my subdivision. I didn't slow down. I didn't look at the brick sign that said Oak Creek Estates. I watched the rearview mirror. No one followed, just the rain and the gray asphalt. A half-mile past the entrance, I turned down a service road that ran parallel to the high-tension power lines behind the neighborhood. It was a gravel track, rutted and washed out, used only by utility trucks and teenagers, looking for a place to park. The truck bounced violently. "Hold on," I muttered. I drove until we were behind a dense cluster of pines that bordered the back of my property. I pulled the truck deep into the brush, letting the wet branches scrape against the paint. I killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the tink-tink of the cooling engine and the rain drumming on the roof. "Leave your bag," I said. "Just bring yourself." We got out into the drizzle. The air was raw, smelling of wet pine needles and ozone. I took Leo's hand. It was trembling so hard it felt like he was vibrating. "We have to be quiet," I said, crouching down to his level, "quieter than we've ever been. Can you do that for me, Leo?" He nodded, his eyes wide. We crept through the brush. The wet leaves soaked my jeans instantly, clinging to my legs like cold fingers. My boots sank into the mud, sucking at my heels with every step. My shoulder throbbed with a vengeance, the dampness working its way into the old injury. We approached the back of my property line. Through the trees, I could see it. My house, a sturdy brick ranch I had bought 30 years ago. I had repointed that brick myself. I had built the deck. I had installed the windows. It looked peaceful. The bird feeder was swaying in the wind. The curtains were drawn. It was a monument to a quiet life. And it was about to become a crime scene. "Get down," I whispered. We were at the fence line. Next to my property was the Higgins place. Old Mrs. Higgins had been moved to a nursing home 6 months ago. Her house was empty, the yard overgrown. Her haggard shed sat right against our shared fence, obscured by a tangle of ivy. "In there," I pointed. We slipped through a gap in the fence boards. A loose plank I had meant to fix for her last summer but never got around to. Procrastination saves lives, I thought grimly. We entered the shed. It smelled of rot old gasoline and dry earth. It was dark, cluttered with rusted rakes and clay pots. Dust motes danced in the slivers of gray light, coming through the cracked walls. Spiders had claimed the corners. I found an overturned crate and sat Leo down in the darkest corner. "Don't move," I whispered. "Don't make a sound." I moved to a knothole in the wood on the side, facing my house. It gave me a direct, circular view of my driveway and the garage door. I checked my watch. 11:58 a.m. "What time is it?" Leo whispered, his voice barely a breath. 2 minutes to noon, I said. My heart was beating slow and heavy now. The adrenaline had settled into a cold focus. I was the structural engineer inspecting a building I knew was going to fail. I just needed to see where the cracks would start. The seconds ticked by. I counted them in my head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. At exactly 12 hours in p.m. to the second, a vehicle turned onto my street. It wasn't speeding. It wasn't aggressive. It moved with a predatory patience. It was a black van, a Ford Transit, late model, unmarked, tinted windows so dark they looked like oil spills. It moved slowly down the street, prowling. "Is it them?" Leo asked from the shadows. The van slowed as it reached my mailbox. It didn't hesitate. It pulled into my driveway. But it didn't park like a guest. It swung wide and backed in. Professionals, I thought, a chill running down my spine, backing in so they can load the body easier, or leave in a hurry. It stopped right up against the garage door, hiding the license plate from the street view. My stomach churned. The nausea was sudden and violent. Leo was right. My God, the boy was right. The driver's side door opened. Then the passenger side. 2 men got out. They weren't wearing ski masks. They weren't wearing black tactical gear. They were dressed in blue coveralls. They looked like HVAC repairmen or electricians. One was tall, lanky. He carried a heavy red toolbox. The other was stocky, bearded. He carried nothing, but he kept his right hand deep in the pocket of his coveralls. They walked to my front door with terrifying casualness. They didn't look around. They didn't knock. I watched through the knothole, my breath fogging the wood. The man with the toolbox knelt down at my front door. I couldn't see exactly what he was holding, a bump key or an electric pick, but I knew that luck. I had installed a Schlage deadbolt 3 years ago. It was solid brass. It took him 5 seconds. Click. I imagined the sound, the tumblers falling, the barrier between my safety and their violence dissolving. The door opened. They stepped inside. They closed the door behind them. I felt a violation so deep it made my knees weak. Those were the rooms where I raised my daughter. That was the hallway where I taught her to walk. That was the kitchen where I made pancakes on Sundays and drank coffee while reading the paper. And now, hired killers were walking through it, tracking mud on my floors, breathing my air, touching my things, looking for me. They're inside, I whispered to Leo. The words tasted like ash. Are they going to wait? Leo asked. For a while, I said. I pictured them moving through the house, checking the bedroom, checking the bathroom, seeing the unmade bed, the coffee cup still in the sink. They'll realize the house is lived in. They'll wait for the target to return. But when they realize I'm not there, I trailed off. They'll call Mark, Leo finished. As if summoned by the boy's words, a vibration buzzed against my thigh. In the silence of the shed, it sounded like a chainsaw. ZZ, ZZZ, ZZ. Leo jumped, kicking a clay pot. It rattled loudly. I froze, staring at the shed door, expecting the men to burst in. But the rain masked the noise. I pulled the phone out of my pocket. The screen lit up the gloom with a harsh white light. Incoming call, Mark. I stared at the screen. The audacity of it, the sheer cold-blooded calculus. He was sitting in his office, or maybe a coffee shop, checking his watch. The hitman had probably radioed him, target not on sight, so now he was calling to check on me, to guide me into the trap. Hey Frank, just checking in. Did you forget something at the house? Why don't you swing by? Don't answer, Leo begged, tears streaming down his face again. Please, Grandpa. I won't, I said. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but declining would send it to voicemail immediately. That was a signal. Letting it ring meant I was just away from the phone. I let it ring, once, twice, 3 times. Then thinking about the GPS, about the tracking apps, about the digital leash Mark had on us, I made a choice. I flipped the phone over and popped the back case off. My hands were shaking, but my fingers were strong. I dug my thumbnail in and pried the battery out. The screen went black. The buzzing stopped. We have to go, I said, shoving the dead pieces into my pocket. Now, if they don't find me and I don't answer, they'll start looking for the truck. They'll check the GPS history before the signal died. Where do we go? Leo asked, standing up. I ran through the options. Hotels were out. Credit cards were trackable. Friends in town were dangerous. Mark knew them all. My brother's cabin, I decided. Uncle Dave? Yeah, it's 2 hours north. Up in the state forest. It's off the grid. Solar power. Well water. Mark has never been there. He doesn't know where it is. It was a lie, or at least I hoped it was. Mark had never visited, but had I ever mentioned the address? Couldn't remember. It was a gamble, but it was the only card I had left. Come on. We slipped out of the shed. We moved fast now. Abandonment of stealth in favor of speed. We scrambled through the mud, back to the truck. I threw Leo into the cab and jumped into the driver's seat. I didn't turn on the headlights. I didn't put on my seatbelt. I twisted the key. The engine roared to life. I threw it in a Reese, backing out of the brush, branches screaming against the metal. I spun the truck around and floored it down the gravel track, mud spraying from the tires in a brown rooster tail. I drove like a man possessed, putting the gray world in my rearview mirror, praying that the head start was enough. The drive north was a blur of gray highway and adrenaline, a fugue state where time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. I kept the speedometer pinned at 75, weaving through the lumbering semi-trucks that threw sheets of dirty water onto my windshield. My eyes were constantly darting to the mirrors. Every set of headlights behind us looked like eyes. Every black SUV was a threat. Every sedan was an unmarked police car. Paranoia is a powerful fuel. It keeps you awake, but it burns you out. "Grandpa," Leo said. His voice was small, barely audible over the roar of the road and the wind battering the truck. I glanced over. He was curled up in the passenger seat, knees to his chest, trying to make himself disappear. He was clutching a small stuffed bear he had pulled from his pocket. A ragged thing with one eye missing that he'd had since he was a baby. "Yeah, kiddo, I'm hungry," he whispered. My stomach hurt. I felt a pang of guilt sharp enough to rival the ache in my shoulder. We hadn't eaten since breakfast. He was a growing boy running on fear and adrenaline. "I know, kid, I know." I scanned the horizon. "We'll stop soon, get you a candy bar. Maybe some chips." But I knew we couldn't stop. Not at a diner with security cameras. Not at a fast food joint where people might recognize. Mark was a financial analyst, but men with that much money had reach. They had resources. If he was desperate enough to kill his own father-in-law, he was desperate enough to burn the world down to find us. We were ghosts, and ghosts don't stop for burgers. Ping. The sound was soft, a singular electronic chime from the dashboard. I looked down. The low fuel light glowed amber, a small, mocking gas pump icon. "Damn it," I cursed, slamming my hand against the steering wheel. "What's wrong?" Leo flinched. "I forgot to fill up," I muttered. "I was going to do it after I dropped you off." I was a man who prided himself on preparation. I kept jumper cables, a first aid kit, and a spare tire in the truck at all times. But in the chaos of the morning, in the rush to get Leo, I had neglected the most basic thing. The needle was hovering over the empty line. The trip computer read 40 miles to empty. The cabin was 50 miles away. "We need gas," I said, my mind racing, "but I can't use my credit card. They can trace the transaction. It pins us to a location instantly." I reached for my wallet while steering with my knee, a dangerous maneuver, but I couldn't slow down. I flipped it open. 2 20s. I had $40 in cash. It wouldn't fill the tank of the F-150, not with gas prices the way they were, but it would get us there. I needed a station, but not a Shell or a BP. Not one of those brightly lit travel centers with high-definition cameras on every pump. I needed a relic. 10 miles later, the highway dissolved into a 2-lane state road. The trees grew thicker, crowding the asphalt. I saw a sign, rusted and leaning, "Gas and Bait 2 miles." It was a place I hadn't thought of in years. Elias's station. It sat on a lonely stretch of road near the reservoir. I pulled in. The station was a crumbling structure of cinder block and corrugated tin. The pumps were old analog dials, not digital screens. I parked the truck behind a rusted dumpster, shielding it from the road. "Stay here," I told Leo. "Lock the doors. If anyone comes up to the window who isn't me, you lay on the horn." "Do you understand?" Yes. He gripped the bear tighter. I put on my baseball cap and pulled the collar of my canvas jacket up. I stepped out into the rain. The cold hit me like a slap. I walked into the station. A bell above the door jingled, a cheerful sound that felt out of place. The air inside smelled of stale tobacco, motor oil, and beef jerky. The owner was behind the counter. Elias. He was an old man, skin like tanned leather, wearing a vest filled with fishing lures. I knew him from years ago. We used to fish for bass in the same spots before my knees gave out. He was reading a newspaper. He looked up over his spectacles. His eyes narrowed. "Frank?" he asked, squinting through the dim light. "That you?" I froze. I had hoped for anonymity. "Hey, Elias," I said, keeping my head down, water dripping from the brim of my hat. "Just passing through." Elias lowered the paper. He looked at me. He looked at the mud splattered up to my knees. He looked at the sweat beading on my forehead despite the cold. He looked at the way my right hand hovered near my waist, as if reaching for a tool or a weapon that wasn't there. "You look like hell, Frank," Elias said bluntly. He leaned over the counter, his joints popping. "You okay? You look like you're running from something." He glanced out the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, he could see the top of my truck. He saw the silhouette of a small head in the passenger window. "Is that the grandson?" Elias asked. "Jessica's boy." "Yeah," I said, my voice tight, "taking him for a fishing trip. Up north." Elias looked at the rain pounding the window. It was coming down in sheets now, turning the dirt lot into a swamp. "In this weather?" he asked. His gaze drifted to the phone on the wall behind him, a landline. I felt the tension coil in my chest. Did he know? Had he seen the news? Was there an amber alert already? "He likes the rain," I lied. "Fish bite better." I slapped the two $20 bills on the counter. "Just gas, Elias, on pump 2. Keep the change." Elias looked at the money. Then he looked at me. There was a long silence. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator unit holding the bait worms. He knew something was wrong. He could smell the trouble on me like ozone before a storm. "All right," he said slowly. He pushed a button under the counter to activate the pump. "Take care, Frank. Watch the roads. They're washing out." He hose, I thought. He suspects I'm in trouble. Or causing it. "Thanks, Elias." I turned and walked out, feeling his eyes drilling into my back. I pumped the gas with shaking hands. The nozzle felt freezing. Every second standing there felt like an hour. I kept expecting a siren. I kept expecting the black van to screech into the lot. The analog numbers on the pump clicked up agonizingly slow. Click, click, click. At $30, I stopped. I couldn't wait any longer. I hung the nozzle up. I didn't wait for a receipt. I jumped back in the truck. Leo was exactly where I left him, eyes glued to the door. "Did he see us?" Leo asked. "He saw Vi," I said. "We have to go." I peeled out of the station, gravel spraying against the dumpster. I didn't look back to see if Elias was picking up that phone. 5 miles down the road, the blue lights appeared. I saw them in the rearview mirror first, a sudden strobe effect lighting up the wet asphalt behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs, a chaotic rhythm that made my breath catch. A state trooper cruiser was merging onto the highway behind us. "Don't look back," I hissed at Leo. "Get on the floor, now." Leo slid down into the footwell, curling into a ball. The cruiser sped up. It was closing the distance fast. I gripped the wheel at 10 and 2, forcing myself to drive exactly at the speed limit. He called it in, I thought. Mark reported the kidnapping. "They're looking for the truck." The cruiser got closer. I could see the silhouette of the officer inside, Officer Miller. I didn't know him, but I saw the grim set of his jaw in the mirror. He was right on my bumper. I could see the grill of the Charger looming large. I held my breath. My hand drifted toward the door handle. If he lights me up, I run. I take the dirt road. I crash the gate. This is it. It ends here. Then the cruiser swerved. It cut sharply into the left lane, accelerating with a roar of its V8 engine. It sped past us, throwing a wave of viewer over my windshield. He wasn't chasing me. He was chasing a speeder 1/2 mile up the road. I let out a shuddering breath, my vision swimming with spots. "Okay," I gasped. "Okay. We're okay. Get up, Leo." 30 minutes later, the adrenaline crash hit me. It started as a tightness in the center of my chest, like a belt being pulled 1 notch too tight. Then it radiated. A dull, heavy ache spread down my left arm and up into my jaw. Angina. I had a mild heart condition. Stable angina, the doctor called it. Manageable, with diet and medication, triggered by exertion and stress. And today had been nothing but stress. I rubbed my chest with my fist, trying to massage the pain away. It felt like a vise was clamping down on my heart muscle. "Grandpa?" Leo was watching me. "You look sweaty. You're red." "Just hot in here," I lied, cracking the window. The cold air didn't help. The air felt thin, like I couldn't get enough oxygen into my lungs. I reached for the center cup holder. That's where I kept my emergency nitroglycerin. My hand grasped empty air. I looked down. The cup holder was empty. I cursed silently. A string of profanities that would have made a sailor blush. I had left the refill bottle on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee pot, in the house where the killers were waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut for a second. Stupid. Stupid old man. I had to focus. Panic would only make the heart rate go up. Higher heart rate meant more oxygen demand. More demand meant more pain. And eventually, a full-blown myocardial infarction. "Grandpa, are you dying?" Leo asked. His voice trembled, teetering on the edge of hysteria. I forced a grin. It felt like a rictus of pain. "No," I said firmly. "I'm too stubborn to die today, Leo. It's just indigestion. That gas station jerky." We reached the turnoff for the cabin. It was a dirt logging road, unmarked, vanishing into the deep woods. The rain had turned it into a river of mud. The truck hit the mud and slid sideways instantly. I corrected, steering into the slide that the ground was soup. The tires fought for traction. We hit a deep rut. Crunch. The sound of metal hitting rock was sickening. The truck bottomed out, the engine revved high. Fiara, but we weren't moving. The wheels spun, flinging mud, 30 feet into the air. We were stuck. Eyes centered on a hidden boulder. "Damn it!" I slammed the dashboard. I tried rocking it. Reverse. Drive. Reverse. Drive. Nothing. Just the smell of burning rubber and wet earth. "We have to walk," I said, staring up the dark, rain-soaked hill. "It's a mile, maybe a mile and a half." "In the rain?" Leo asked. "Yeah. Grab your coat." We got out. The mud sucked at my boots immediately. The rain was freezing, close to sleet. It soaked through my jacket in seconds. The hike was a nightmare. Every step was a battle against the suction of the mud. The incline was steep. My chest was screaming now. The pain was a constant, heavy pressure, like an elephant sitting on my sternum. I had to stop every 50 yards, leaning against a tree, gasping for air, pretending to check for landmarks so Leo wouldn't see me, clutching my heart. Leo was crying silently. I could hear his sniffles. But he kept walking. He was tough. He was Jessica's son. "Almost there," I wheezed. "Just over this ridge." We crested the hill. There it was. The cabin. It was a small log structure, built by my father in the 70s. It looked abandoned. Leaves piled on the porch, the windows dark. It looked like the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I stumbled up the steps. I didn't have a key. I hadn't been here in 2 years, but I knew the trick. I kicked the door frame at the bottom right corner while jiggling the handle. The rusty lock gave way. We fell inside. It was freezing. Colder than the outside. Somehow, it smelled of dust. Wood smoke and mouse droppings. I collapsed into the old rocking chair, my chest heaving, my vision graying out at the edges. "We're safe here," I whispered, though I didn't believe it. For tonight, we were trapped. No phone, no car, no medicine. And somewhere in the darkness behind us, a predator was hunting. Night fell like a hammer. The woods outside didn't just get dark. They ceased to exist, replaced by a wall of obsidian blackness pressed against the single-pane windows. The rain had turned to set, pecking at the glass with a sound like 1,000 tiny fingernails. Tick, tick, tick. Inside, the cabin was a tomb of cold air and shadows. I had managed to get a small fire going in the potbelly stove, using old newspapers and a few dry logs from the woodbox. But the heat hadn't penetrated the room yet. It only cast a flickering orange glow that made the mounted deer heads on the wall look like they were moving. Leo had finally crashed. He was curled up on the braided rug in front of the stove, twitching in his sleep. The stuffed bear tucked under his chin. Poor kid, his world had been dismantled in 12 hours. I sat in the hickory rocking chair facing the door. Across my lap lay a rusted 12-gauge Remington shotgun I had found in the closet. I hadn't fired it in a decade. I had found 3 shells in a kitchen drawer, the brass tarnished green with age. I didn't know if the firing pin would strike or if the barrel would explode in my face, but the weight of the steel was the only comfort I had. My chest was a dull, constant throb. I regulated my breathing in for 4, hold for 4, out for It was a technique I learned managing stress on high-rise builds when the wind was howling and the steel was swinging, but my heart wasn't listening. It fluttered and skipped, a dying engine running on fumes. Suddenly, a noise. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the settling of the logs. It was the distinct wet crunch of a boot on gravel. I sat up, the rocker creaking loudly. I froze. Step. Step. Pause. Someone was walking up the path. I stood up, fighting the wave of dizziness that washed over me. I motioned for Leo to stay down, though he was still asleep. I thumbed the safety off the Remington. Click. Footsteps on the wooden porch. Heavy, deliberate. Then, the specific groan of the third board from the left. I knew that board. I had meant to replace it 5 years ago. It only creaked if you weighed more than 200 pounds. I raised the shotgun, aiming it chest high at the door. My arms were shaking, not from fear but from weakness. "Who's there?" I shouted. My voice sounded ragged, unrecognizable to my own ears. "I'm armed. I will shoot." "Frank?" A voice called out from the other side of the wood. "Frank? It's me, Dave." "Open the door, Dave." The tension in my shoulders dropped an inch, but the gun stayed up. My younger brother. I moved to the door and threw the bolt. I swung it open. Dave stood there, framed by the sleet. He was wearing a bright yellow raincoat that reflected the firelight. He was dripping wet, his face pale and slick with rain. He looked frantic, his eyes darting around the room before landing on the shotgun. "Jesus, Frank," he breathed, pushing past me into the room. "Put that thing down." I lowered the gun slightly, but didn't engage the safety. "Dave?" I asked, bewildered. How did you find us?" Dave slammed the door shut and threw the deadbolt. He leaned his back against the wood, sliding down slightly as if his legs had given out. "Thank God," he panted. "I saw the tire tracks at the bottom of the hill. I saw the truck in the ditch. I knew you'd come here. It's the only place left." He looked at me, really looked at me, with eyes that seemed too bright, too alert. "You look terrible, Frank. You're gray." "I'm fine," I lied, leaning on the back of the rocking chair for support. "Dave, listen to me. We're in trouble. Serious trouble." "I know," Dave said. He stripped off his wet coat, tossing it onto the table. Underneath he wore a thick flannel shirt, identical to one I owned. "Mark called me. Frank." I stiffened. "Mark?" "He's worried sick," Dave said, walking toward the fire to warm his hands. He spoke fast, his words stumbling over each other. "He called me 3 hours ago. He said you took Leo from the airport. He said you were having an episode." "An episode?" I scoffed. "Is that what he called it?" "He said you were confused," Dave continued, turning his back to the fire to face me. "He said you were off your meds, that you were talking about conspiracies. He thinks you're having a breakdown, Frank. He thinks you might hurt the boy." I stared at my brother. We had the same nose, the same jawline. I had taught him how to throw a baseball. I had gotten him his first job on a site. "He lied to you, Dave," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Did he?" Dave asked. He took a step toward me. "Frank, look at you. You're holding a shotgun. You're hiding in a cabin with no power. You crashed your truck. Mark said you were paranoid. This looks like paranoia." "Paranoia is when you imagine threats," I said. "This is survival. Mark hired men to kill me, Dave. Leo heard them. It's about money." Dave stopped. He blinked. A slow, deliberate movement. He looked at the sleeping boy on the rug, then back to me. "Money?" Dave asked. The word hung in the cold air. "Insurance," I said, watching his face closely. I needed him to understand. I needed him to be on my side. My life insurance. The property, the portfolio, $3 million. Mark is in debt, deep debt. Dave looked down at his boots. It was a long, heavy sound, like a tire losing air. The frantic energy seemed to drain out of him, replaced by something heavier. Something darker. 3 million, Dave murmured. "Yeah, that sounds about right." The tone of his voice made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't shock. It wasn't outrage. It was confirmation. The air left the room. The fire seemed to dim. "Dave," I whispered, "why aren't you surprised?" He didn't look up. He kept staring at his muddy boots. I know, Frank, Dave said softly. My knees buckled. I had to grip the chair to keep from falling. What? Dave looked up. His eyes were sad. Infinite sadness. But behind the sadness was something hard like flint. I know about the money, Frank, because I owe them too. The world tilted. Dave, no. We went in on the deal together, Dave said, his voice rising, cracking with a mix of shame and defensiveness. Mark and me, the crypto scheme, it was supposed to be easy money, a sure thing. We leveraged everything, the houses, the savings. He took a step toward me, his hands pleading. We lost everything, Frank. Everything. In 48 hours. It was all gone. So you decided to kill me? I asked. The rage didn't come. Just a cold, hollow emptiness where my heart used to be. Your own brother, to cover a gambling debt. It's not just a debt, Dave yelled, the sound waking Leo. The boy sat up, rubbing his eyes, looking terrified at the two men arguing. The loan sharks, they aren't playing, Frank. These aren't bank collectors. They sent photos of my wife leaving the gym. They sent photos of Mark's kids at school. They said if we didn't pay by tonight, they would start cutting pieces off. So you trade my life for yours? I asked. That's the math. It's better than all of us dying, Dave screamed. Tears were running down his face now. Mark came up with a plan. He said you were sick anyway. He said your heart was a ticking bomb. He said, you said it was a mercy. A mercy. My mercy, I repeated. The word tasted like bile. I just had to make sure you were found, Dave said. He wiped his nose with his sleeve. I tracked the truck's GPS. Mark gave me the login. When the signal died, I knew you'd come to the cabin. I knew you. He reached into his pocket. I raised the shotgun again. Don't. He didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out his phone. The screen was glowing. I'm sorry, Frank, he said. I really am, but I can't let them hurt Linda. What did you do? I texted them the coordinates. He whispered. 10 minutes ago, before I walked up the path, I looked out the window, through the rain and the darkness. 2 beams of light cut through the trees. High beams, bouncing over the ruts of the logging road. They swept across the cabin window, illuminating the dust in the air, blinding us for a second. The black van had arrived. You led the wolf to the door, I said. Dave looked at the lights, then at me. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, Dave, I said, shifting my grip on the shotgun. You just made the wrong one. The sound of car doors slamming echoed up the hill. We were surrounded. You traitor, I spat. The words felt inadequate, too small to encompass the magnitude of what he had done. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had betrayed the blood that ran in both our veins. I raised the shotgun, leveling the bead sight at his chest. My finger tightened on the trigger. Get out of the way, Dave. I growled. I'm not asking. You can't shoot me, Frank, Dave said, his voice trembling but his feet planted. He held his hands up, palms out, a gesture of surrender that was actually a blockade. I'm your brother. We shared a bunk bed. I was the best man at your wedding. You stopped being my brother the minute you sold me to the butchers. I said, my heart screamed at me to pull the trigger, to end the threat, but 40 years of love don't vanish in a second, even in the face of treachery. My finger froze. I couldn't kill him, and he knew it. Dave saw the hesitation. He lunged. I'm taking the boy, he yelled. They won't hurt him if I hand him over. He moved toward the sleeping bag. No! The scream tore from my throat. I didn't shoot. I reversed the shotgun, grabbing the barrel with both hands, using the heavy wooden stock as a club. I swung with every ounce of strength my rotator cuff had left. Crack. The walnut stock connected with Dave's ribcage. It was a sickening sound, wet and brittle, like stepping on dry branches. Dave howled, a high, animalistic sound of shock and pain. He crumpled to the floor, clutching his side, gasping for air. Leo, I shouted, ignoring my brother's groans. Get in the root cellar. Now. I pointed to the area under the rug. Decades ago, my father had dug a small root cellar to keep potatoes and canned goods from freezing. It was a hole in the earth, lined with stone. Leo scrambled up, his eyes wide with terror. He pulled back the heavy woven rug. He found the iron ring of the trapdoor and hauled it open. "Grandpa, come with me," he cried. "I can't," I said. "Get in. Close it. Do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do you understand? You are a ghost." He dropped into the dark hole. I kicked the rug back over the trapdoor, smoothing it out with my boot just as the front door exploded inward. It wasn't a kick. It was a battering ram. The old pine door splintered off its hinges, crashing into the room with a violence that shook the floorboards. Wind and sleet swirled into the warm room, extinguishing the candles instantly. The only light now came from the dying embers of the wood stove and the tactical flashlights cutting through the gloom. Mark stood in the doorway. He looked grotesque. He wasn't wearing his tailored suit. He was wearing a stiff, new hunting jacket that still had the creases from the store. He held a pistol, a Glock black and blocky, but he held it like a dead fish, his grip loose, his finger hovering dangerously near the guard. Behind him were the two men from the van. The professionals. And a new man, Vince. Vince was huge. A mountain of muscle wrapped in a black leather jacket. He was bald, his scalp shining in the flashlight beams. He didn't look like a mechanic. He looked like a man who enjoyed hurting things. "It's over, Frank," Mark said. He stepped into the room, sweeping the gun around nervously. He looked exhausted. His skin was the color of old paste. Just make it easy. Please. I don't want it to be messy." "Easy?" I laughed. It was a dark, crazy sound that scraped my throat. "You think this is easy, Mark? You think killing family is like filing a tax return?" "It's business," Mark whispered, seemingly to himself. "It's just business." Vince stepped past Mark, pushing him aside like a piece of furniture. He scanned the room with dead, shark-like eyes. He looked at the empty sleeping bag. He looked at Dave groaning on the floor. "Where's the boy?" Vince asked. His voice was like gravel in a cement mixer. Deep, resonant. "Gone," I lied, standing tall behind the heavy oak dining table. I kept the shotgun below the tabletop, hidden. I sent him into the woods hours ago. He's miles away by now. "Liar," Mark snapped. His eyes darted around the room. "He wouldn't leave you." "Dave, get up. Check the back room." Dave curled into a fetal position, clutching his side. Blood was seeping through his flannel shirt. "You broke my ribs," he wheezed. "I can't breathe. Useless," Mark muttered. "You're all useless." Vince stepped forward. He raised a pistol equipped with a long, cylindrical suppressor. "Enough talking," Vince said. "We find the kid after we deal with the old man. Less noise that way." He leveled the gun at my head. I looked at the barrel. It looked like a black tunnel. I waited for my life to flash before my eyes, but all I saw was the red toolbox on the workbench behind Vince. My engineer's brain took over. Time dilated. I calculated the angles. I had one shell, one chance. If I shot Vince, the other two would cut me down instantly. If I shot Mark, the professionals would finish the job. I needed chaos. I looked up. Hanging from the rafter above the center of the room was an old kerosene lantern. It was full. I had filled it myself 2 years ago. "Goodbye, Frank," Vince said. I didn't speak. I dropped to my knees behind the heavy oak table just as Vince fired. Thwip! Thwip! 2 bullets slammed into the table. The wood splintered, showering my hair with sharp fragments. The impact was heavy, like a hammer strike. "Flush him out," Mark yelled, his voice cracking with panic. I racked the slide of the Remington. Chuck-clack. I popped up, not aiming at the men, but aiming at the ceiling. "Burn," I whispered.
Boom!
The 12-gauge roared in the confined space. The sound was deafening, a physical blow to the eardrums. The shot was perfect. The glass globe of the lantern shattered. A gallon of kerosene rained down into the room. It hit the hot stovepipe. It hit the open front of the wood stove. Whoosh! It wasn't a fire. It was an explosion. A wall of orange flame erupted between me and the men, separating the room in half. The kerosene splashed onto the old dry floorboards, which drank it up like kindling. "Fire!" one of the mechanics yelled, shielding his face. The heat was instantaneous and intense. It singed my eyebrows. Get out, Mark screamed, backing away toward the door. The whole place is going up. The cabin was built of 80-year-old pine, dried by decades of winters. It was essentially a pile of organized firewood. The flames licked up the walls, climbing the curtains, reaching for the roof. The two hired men didn't hesitate. They weren't paid enough to burn to death. They turned and ran out into the storm. Vince hesitated, glaring at me through the wall of fire. But the heat forced him back. Mark stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the night. He looked at me. For a moment, I saw the greed override the fear. "Give me the deed, Frank," he screamed over the roar of the fire. "Tell me where the papers are. Don't let it burn." I coughed, smoke filling my lungs, searing my throat. "Go to hell, Mark," I choked out. "You'll never find it." A burning beam from the ceiling groaned and swung down, crashing between us, blocking the door with a curtain of sparks. Mark turned and fled into the night. I was alone in the furnace. The heat was unbearable. My skin felt tight, like it was shrinking. The smoke was a thick black blanket choking off the oxygen. "Grandpa," Leo's muffled voice came from beneath the floor. "Stay down," I yelled, though I could barely hear myself. I looked at the front door, blocked by fire. The windows were too small, mere slits in the logs. I was trapped, and my heart was fluttering wildly, a hummingbird in my chest.
Think, Frank. Think like a builder. The back wall.
I remembered the inspection I did 2 years ago. The bottom logs on the north wall were rotted, termites and water damage. I had covered it with paneling, meaning to replace them, but the structure was compromised. It was the weak point. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. It is hot to the touch. I stumbled to the back wall, coughing violently. The smoke was blinding now. I swung the iron poker with everything I had left. Smash. The iron punched through the thin paneling and sank into the soft, rotted wood of the log. I yanked it back and swung again and again. Smash. Crunch. The rot gave way. A hole opened up, jagged and small, but growing. Cold, wet night air rushed in, feeding the fire behind me. The draft made the flames roar louder. I dropped the poker and ran back to the rug. I kicked it aside. The wool was smothering. I hauled the trapdoor open. Leo was huddled at the bottom, looking up at me, his face streaked with tears and soot. "Leo, up, now!" I reached down. He jumped, grabbing my hand. I pulled him up with a strength I didn't know I possessed. The roof groaned above us, an ominous cracking sound. The main ridge beam was failing. "The hole," I pointed. "Go." I grabbed him by the waist and threw him toward the back wall. He scrambled through the jagged opening, tearing his clothes on the splintered wood. I looked back one last time. Dave was gone. He must have crawled out while I was distracted. I dove for the hole. My shoulders scraped against the rough logs. Splinters dug into my cheek. I pushed, kicked, and clawed my way through the rot. I fell out onto the wet mud outside. Roar! I hit the ground just as the roof of the cabin collapsed inward. The sound was like a bomb going off. A massive expulsion of air and sparks shot into the night sky, illuminating the wet trees in a terrifying orange glow. The heat washed over us, intense enough to blister skin even from 10 feet away. "Run!" I gasped. I grabbed Leo's hand. We scrambled into the darkness of the woods, slipping on the wet leaves, crashing through the brush. We didn't stop until we were deep in the tree line, hidden by the thick trunks of the ancient pines. We stopped, gasping for air. The rain hissed as it hit the fire. We watched the cabin burn. It was a funeral pyre for my past, my father's house. My memories, all of it turning to ash. "They'll think we died," Leo whispered, clutching his bear. "They'll think we burned up." I looked at the inferno. I looked at the boy. "Let them," I said. "Let them think we're ghosts." We crouched in the tree line, shivering violently as the adrenaline began to bleed out of our systems, replaced by the biting cold of the storm. The fire roared, a beacon that would inevitably draw the volunteer fire department from the valley, but we couldn't be there when they arrived. "Come on," I whispered, pulling Leo up. My knees popped, a sound like dry twigs snapping. We circled back toward the road, giving the burning cabin a wide berth. We moved through the shadows, stepping over wet roots, and sliding on pine needles. When we reached the clearing, where the vehicles were parked, the scene was empty. The black van was gone. Mark's rental car was gone. They had fled like cockroaches when the lights turned on. But my brother's car, a beat-up sedan he used for his contracting gigs, was still there, parked haphazardly next to my ditched truck. I limped over to it. I peered inside. The keys were dangling in the ignition. Dave had been in such a rush to confront me, and then to escape the fire, that he had abandoned it. Or maybe in his pain, he had ridden away with Mark. I opened the door. It unlocked with a groan. "Get in," I told Leo. We climbed inside. The interior smelled of stale fast food and sawdust, the smell of my brother. It made my heart ache with a fresh, sharp pang. I turned the key. The engine turned over. I didn't turn on the headlights. I navigated the rutted logging road by the faint moonlight and memory, the suspension clunking with every pothole. "Where are we going?" Leo asked, his voice hollow. "To the police station in town." "No," I said, gripping the wheel. "Mark knows the chief. He plays golf with the mayor. We can't trust anyone local." I drove 2 counties over. I drove for an hour, my chest burning, my left arm numb. I drove until the trees gave way to the highway, and the highway led us to the harsh, sterile lights of the state police headquarters. Walking into that station was harder than walking into the fire. I was covered in soot, mud, and dried blood. My flannel shirt was torn. Leo looked like a war orphan, clutching his one-eyed bear, his face smeared with ash. The lobby was quiet. White tile floors, fluorescent lights that buzzed with a headache-inducing frequency. The desk sergeant, a woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense face, looked up from her computer. Her eyes widened. She stood up slowly. "Sir?" she asked. "Do you need an ambulance?" I leaned against the high counter, leaving a smudge of soot on the pristine laminate. "I want to report an attempted murder." I rasped. My voice was gone. 3 counts, and a conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. "Okay," she said, her hand reaching for the radio. "Who is the victim, sir?"
"I am," I said. I looked down at Leo, who was pressing his face into my leg. "And my grandson." I reached into my pocket. My hand shook as I pulled out the object I had swiped from the floor of the cabin before the fire took it. Dave's phone. I placed it on the counter. It cracked against the surface. "And I have the evidence," I said. "It's all in there. The texts. The GPS coordinates. The plan." The next few hours were a blur of flashlights, cameras, and doctors. They took us to an interview room. They gave us blankets that smelled of bleach. They gave Leo a cup of hot chocolate that he stared at but didn't drink. A detective came in. Detective Holloway.
He was young, sharp-eyed, and didn't interrupt. I told him everything. I told him about the debt, the insurance policy, the van, the fire. As I spoke, I felt a strange detachment. It felt like I was telling a story about someone else, a story about a man named Frank, who had a daughter named Jessica. Jessica. While the detective typed, my mind drifted back. I saw Jessica at 5 years old, bringing me a dandelion from the yard. "For you, Daddy." I saw her at 16, crying her broken heart. Me holding her while she sobbed into my shoulder. "I'll never let anyone hurt you, Jess." How did we get here? How did the little girl with the dandelion become the woman who signed my death warrant? "We have the phone unlocked," Holloway said, breaking my reverie. He looked grim. "You were right. The text thread is extensive." He looked at me with something like pity. I hated it. "We're issuing warrants now," he said. The wheels of justice turned, grinding up what was left of my family. Mark was arrested at O'Hare Airport 3 hours later. He was sitting in the first-class lounge, sipping a scotch, waiting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands. When they handcuffed him, he didn't fight. He just cried. He gave up Dave immediately, hoping for a plea deal. Dave was found at a cheap motel 3 towns over. He was lying on the bed, passed out from the pain of 3 broken ribs. He didn't deny it. He just asked if I was alive. When the officer said yes, Dave closed his eyes and didn't open them again until arraignment. Until arraignment. And Jessica. That was the blow that shattered me. I kept hoping, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in years, that she didn't know, that Mark had manipulated her, that she was innocent. But the digital trail doesn't lie. The police found the emails, the texts on Mark's phone. Is it done yet? Not yet. Complications. Mark, I can't take this waiting. Just tempt me when it's over. She knew about the debt. She knew about the solution. She had argued against the violence initially. There were texts where she begged him to find another way. But in the end, she had signed the papers authorizing Mark to act as the executor of my estate in the event of sudden passing. She was charged as an accessory to attempted murder and conspiracy. I visited her in the holding cell once, 2 weeks later. The room was cold. A pane of thick glass separated us. She looked small, broken. She wasn't wearing the charcoal suit anymore. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion. Her hair was unwashed. She wouldn't look at me. She stared at the metal shelf in front of her. Why? I asked. It was the only word I had left. I didn't think they would hurt Leo. She wept. Her voice was tinny through the intercom. Mark promised. He swore on his life that Leo would be with him. That you would just go to sleep. You thought killing me was okay as long as Leo was safe? I asked. My voice was quiet, trembling with a rage that had turned into grief. I was scared, Dad, she whispered. She looked up then. Her eyes were red-rimmed. You don't understand. The people Mark owed, they were monsters. I thought I was saving my family. I was your family, Jess, I said. She flinched as if I had slapped her. You chose money over your father, I said, and you risked your son to do it. You put a price tag on my life. I'm sorry, she sobbed, pressing her hand against the glass. Daddy, please, I'm so sorry. I looked at her hand. I remembered holding it when she was small. I remembered walking her down the aisle to marry Mark. I placed my hand on the glass, opposite hers. The glass was cold. I know you are, I said. But sorry it doesn't rebuild the house. Jess? The foundation is gone. I stood up. Dad, don't go, she screamed. Please. I have to go, I said.
I have a boy to raise.
I walked away. The sound of her screaming my name echoed down the concrete hallway. It was a sound that would wake me up in the middle of the night for the rest of my life. 6 months later, I stood on the porch of a new house. It wasn't a sprawling ranch like the old one. It was a modest 2-bedroom bungalow closer to the city, but far enough away to have a yard. The old house, the one the killers had violated, I sold it. I couldn't walk into that kitchen again. I couldn't look at the shed. Too many ghosts. This new house needed work. The gutters were loose. The porch railing wobbled. That was good. It gave me something to do. My health had taken a hit. The stress had weakened my heart further. I moved slower now. I took more pills. I couldn't lift heavy beams anymore, but I was alive. I sat on the swing, watching the yard. Leo was there. He was throwing a tennis ball for a puppy we had adopted from the shelter. I met named Buster. Leo had changed. The silence that had gripped him in the truck had lasted for months. He had nightmares. He wet the bed. We went to therapy twice a week. But slowly the bricks were being relaid. The structure was being reinforced. He was laughing now. It was a rusty sound, unused for too long. But it was real. I had full custody. The courts didn't hesitate. Jessica was serving 10 to 15. Mark and Dave were looking at 20. It wasn't how I planned to spend my retirement. Changing schools, making lunches, helping with math homework that I barely understood, raising a boy alone at 65. But as I watched him run, I realized this wasn't a burden. It was a lifeline. Hey, Grandpa, watch this, Leo yelled, holding the ball high. I smiled. It was a tired smile etched into a face that had aged 10 years and 6 months. But it was genuine. I'm watching, kiddo, I called back. I'm always watching. He threw the ball. The dog chased it, tripping over its own paws. Leo doubled over, giggling. I reached into my pocket. I felt the smooth metal of a pin. It wasn't a police badge. It wasn't a medal of honor. It was a cheap plastic pin. Leo had bought me at the school fair last week with his allowance. It said, "World's Best Grandpa." I rubbed my thumb over the letters. I had lost my daughter. I had lost my brother. I had lost the illusion of safety. But I looked at the boy. The black man was gone. The fire was out. The monsters were in cages. We were survivors. We were a different kind of family now. Smaller, scarred, built from the wreckage. But we were standing, and as long as I had breath in my lungs, and a beat in this old, stubborn heart, no shadow would ever touch that boy again. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, or if you've ever had to protect the ones you love against all odds, please hit that like button and subscribe. It helps the channel grow. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Frank's shoes? Would you have forgiven Dave? Let's talk about it.